Hello, this is Meher Roy, and I shall present on an architecture for blockchain media networks. This presentation was originally made for the Princeton Ethereum meetup on the 19th of Jan 2017. In this presentation, we shall walk through ideas such as what does blockchain technology mean for social media? I shall introduce the notion of attention-backed assets, a new category of financial assets that is mapped to the total aggregate attention garnered by a cryptocurrency-like network. Let's start off by acknowledging Arthur C. Clarke and the third of his laws. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. I think this is an amazing quotation because it really captures that technologies from the future are in some ways incomprehensible to people in the present. One of the famous examples is the example of a caveman being confronted with something like an iPhone. For the caveman, an iPhone is effectively a talking stone, a stone that can bring messages from anywhere in the world. To a caveman, the idea that the air around him contains more information than he could consume in 1,000 lifetimes would be outlandish and magical. In some senses, Bitcoin is a technology that came to us from the future. It was completely unexpected, and personally I had a long journey struggling to understand what it really was. And I felt that what the cell phone is to the caveman, Bitcoin is to us. So let's start off with the problem of what is Bitcoin? This question might seem very simple, prosaic and mundane, but I think the blockchain industry has struggled long and hard to understand and answer this question accurately. So when I look across the spectrum of the industry, I see multiple different answers. One of the answers is that Bitcoin is digital gold. It is this system which can enforce digital scarcity and create something that has only 21 million units. But then there are other people that would say Bitcoin is just a global distributed database. That is just this database system in which anybody can write to and anybody could read from. And that is the only speciality of Bitcoin. When one thinks of Bitcoin as a global distributed database and extends that thinking into the current financial industry, what you get is the wave of quote-unquote bank-grade blockchain technology. Scanning across the Ethereum ecosystem, we come across the notion of the world computer. Bitcoin can be thought of as a rudimentary world computer. When one sees Bitcoin from this perspective, it is just akin to a calculator in the cloud to which we could send messages, computational instructions, and get very accurate results out of that machine. So the Ethereum system took this analogy further and said, let us create a global world computer that has more possibilities for computations than Bitcoin itself has. So scanning across the horizon, you see like these three different views of what a system like Bitcoin actually is. This reflects the fact that Bitcoin by itself is very futuristic technology that none of us expected to see in our lives. And once it came, we are trying to understand it by creating analogies to understand it. And each of these analogies is empowering in a certain way and is also restrictive in others. So in this presentation, we are going to take a fourth incomplete analogy to answer what is Bitcoin. Answer I'm going to give to what is Bitcoin is that it is a useful system with multiple self-interested agents reliant on a software protocol and data structure to foster cooperation between agents and equilibrium. So let us walk through it bit by bit. First, we see multiple self-interested agents. What does it mean? It means that each miner, full node owner or user is an agent that has its own objective function and its own utility function. Now, in order for the Bitcoin system to work, there must be cooperation between agents. All of these different agents in the system must take some actions, and all of their actions must add up in order to create a global money transfer system. And what Bitcoin does is it uses a software protocol, Bitcoin Core, and a data structure called the blockchain to foster this cooperation between agents in equilibrium. That might have been a very hard definition to go through, but let us make it easy and understandable from a layman's perspective. Out here, I would like to remind you of Adam Smith's quote that it is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from regard to their own interest. I think this is a very profound statement. What it essentially says is that in order for large parts of the economy to work, what you fundamentally need is for self-interest or selfishness to work. Now, Bitcoin is a system that actually relies on selfishness to make it work. We have like miners, users, and full node owners, and all of these are selfish entities who only care about making money. But the Bitcoin protocol or the Bitcoin code base leverages this selfishness of agents in order to build a useful system. Like normally, we tend to think of human selfishness as a bug, that it is something to be avoided. We teach children that they should not be selfish, that they should be altruistic in some way. But the Bitcoin system works because miners, full node owners, and users are selfish. How? Miners do their job of updating the Bitcoin ledger in the expectation that they shall make money. Full node owners audit the Bitcoin blockchain and transmit data to each other, keeping the network informed of transactions, because they might be serving some user as a cryptocurrency business, and running a full node is the best way to have updated information about the transactions on the network. On the user side, the user is mostly interested to see the value of their Bitcoin go up, which is why they market the Bitcoin system and its currency to other people in the world. So individually, each of these agents that are using the Bitcoin system or participating in it are selfish, but the actions that they perform out of their own selfishness adds together to build a global money transfer system. And I think this is magical. This is the part of Bitcoin that is from the future. Now, over the past 200 years, Adam Smith's notion has been converted into like a mathematical notion of equilibrium. Mathematical notion of equilibrium in academic terminology is called a perfect Bayesian equilibrium. Whenever a system achieves perfect Bayesian equilibrium, all of the agents inside the system essentially end up taking actions in order to fulfill their own self-interest, and in some ways, all of these actions are best replies to each other. So, any individual miner or user or full node owner is basically here in the Bitcoin system thinking that given my beliefs about the types of other agents and actions available to us, I choose that action which optimizes my expected payoff. If I deviate, I lower my expected payoff. So all of them choosing that action that optimizes their expected payoff, and these actions add up to form what is Bitcoin. Armed with that analogy, we can appreciate that there are many people in the cryptocurrency industry that are trying to use this notion of leveraging human selfishness in order to build other systems, right? Some of them ask the question whether they can build a Bitcoin-like system better using things like proof of stake or sharding. And then there are others that wonder whether you could build other systems with the same principle. So examples of such other experiments are like Steem and MakerDAO. And we are going to focus on this kind of thinking that can we use the same principle of Bitcoin in order to build other useful systems on the internet. So our fundamental contention is going to be that yes, other useful systems based on Bitcoin's architecture are not only possible, but probably very profitable to build. Particular system that I want to walk through today is the idea of how do you build networks that generate news feeds as a useful commodity. Just as Bitcoin is a network that creates a money transfer system as a product, can we have a cryptocurrency like network that generates news feeds as a fundamental product? So before we go into that, I would like to walk through how roughly news has worked in the past. So let us start with newspapers. So when you look at a newspaper, effectively a newspaper is also a multi-agent system with multiple types of agents that are collaborating in order to make the system run. So you have content writers or journalists that go and observe things as they happen and they write about it. Then we have editors that take as input whatever the journalists have written and decide on how to structure that information. By structuring the information, I mean deciding which information appears on what page in the newspaper, and on a particular page, what order the information would appear in. So something might appear on the top and something might appear on the bottom. The role of the editor is to make decisions regarding the organization of information. Then we have printers and distributors, which take the output of the work of the editors and they print and distribute that information. The fourth kind of agent we have in the system is the reader or attention payer. The reader or attention payer is just looking to consume information that might be of high utility to him or her. And finally, we have advertisers that are motivated to have their messages appear at prominent places in the newspaper in order to influence what people buy or do with their lives. Newspapers are these multi-agent systems with these 5 kinds of agent types. When we look at traditional news publishing, there is a flow of money in these multi-agent systems. Generally, we might think of a corporation like News Corp being in the center. This News Corp makes money flow from readers and advertisers to itself and then partitions the revenues raised to content writers, editors, printers, distributors, and shareholders. So this slide just represents that money flow in an abstract fashion. Now we had newspapers, right? They worked very well up until the start of this decade. But somewhere around the middle of this decade, a new technology for the consumption of news information came to be. And this was the technology of the newsfeed. I'm pretty sure all of you have used newsfeeds and seen the way they have disrupted the newspaper industry. Now the question is, how do news feeds exactly work? On this slide, I've shown a rough sketch of how news feeds work. The core component in making news feeds work are signals. These are indicated on the left. Signals are basically like likes, upvotes, favorites, or retweets that are generated by the users of a particular network like Facebook or Twitter. And these signals indicate to other people that some particular content might be worth looking at. So when my friend likes something on Facebook, he or she is signaling that that particular piece of content might be useful for me to look at. Now, using these signals, social media platforms use various factors such as a recency factor, a signal strength factor, and a relevance factor to create a content rank. Whatever content has greater content rank appears higher in the newsfeed, and whatever content has lower content rank appears lower in the newsfeed. So let us look at these 3 factors. So the first is the recency factor. Some content that is more recent should be given a greater weight. The second factor is the signal strength factor. Whichever piece of content was liked, favorited, or retweeted by more of my immediate network on a social media site should get greater weightage. And the third is probably the relevance factor, which captures the idea that based on my past behavior on the particular social media platform, we can extract some information about my preferences, about what I like to see, and those preferences can be factored in to the calculation of content rank. So as you can see, one of the main items in the construction of news feeds is the signal strength. Now, the technology of news feeds has changed the way money flows in the information consumption industry. Instead of the News Corp, now we have the App Maker Corporation, and the money flow is from the advertisers to the shareholders and employees of App Maker Corporation. The other thing that is different here is that the role of the journalist has been replaced by the role of the content creator. This might be a blogger or a video artist, etc. The role of the editor has been replaced by a signal generator. This is essentially somebody who is liking, favoriting, or retweeting something. The motivations and roles of the attention payers and advertisers has kind of remained the same. This sea change in how money flows in the information consumption industry has led to a lot of disruption of livelihoods. Now you might ask, why are we talking about news feeds when it comes to blockchain technology? Blockchain technology enables a large conceptual jump in how we signal, create, and compose news feeds. And let us try to understand what this jump accurately is. So on the left, we have the conventional social media web, which might include companies such as Reddit, Facebook, and Twitter. And what these companies are essentially doing is these companies have an internal database, and this database tracks pieces of content, signals that the social network inside the application has emitted, and preferences of all of the users in that network. Once these companies have pieces of content, signals, and preferences of their users, they can combine all of these data sets to compose news feeds for all of their users. The beauty about the blockchain on the right is that you can have the content and the signals reliant on distributed infrastructure instead of the private databases of the large social media companies. For instance, on a blockchain media platform, not only does the content lie on an open web, but also the signals that various people have emitted with regards to that content would also be open data that anybody could use to compose news feeds. This is a very big conceptual jump. In this slide, we walk through what blockchain-based news feeds might look like. So on the bottom, we have the IPFS or HTTP web, where all the content resides. And in the middle, we use blockchain technology for the storage of signals. And on top, we can have centralized services that read all of these signals and the content. Using these signals and content, they compose news feeds for different clients around the world. So the key difference here is that a lot of different companies could use the same set of signals and content in order to compose the news feed. Today, if you are on Facebook, when you signal that some particular content is important, that information or that signal resides on the internal database of Facebook. And because all of our signals reside on the internal database of Facebook, only Facebook has the power to compose news feeds, the Facebook news feed, for all of us. What is different in a blockchain environment is that because signals can be stored on distributed infrastructure, there could be like hundreds of companies in the business of composing news feeds for their users. There can be a lot of competition on the news feed layer. And this lot of competition might translate into different user interfaces to serve different kinds of tastes. Different companies might pioneer new user interfaces but use the same open public signaling and content data to power their news feeds. So what it concretely means, we can have technologies or systems that essentially remove most of the role of app maker corporation from the loop of the multi-agent system. For a first order approximation, this is not exactly correct. We can consider that blockchain technology can allow us to eliminate the app maker corporation from the loop of how content is generated, signaled, and attention paid to that content. So my fundamental question to you is, once the central party is eliminated, how would the money flow in this new system? So you can pause for a moment and think about this question. So I could personally come up with multiple different cases. So the first case is advertising won't exist at all in blockchain-based media. Essentially, advertisers would be removed from the loop and there would be no money flow inside the system. A second case could be that advertising will exist in blockchain-based media, but the revenues of advertising shall be routed to content creators. Case 3, advertising shall exist, but the revenues shall be routed to signal generators. people who like, retweet and favorite will end up making most of the money spent on advertising in blockchain social media. Case 4 could be advertising revenues shall be routed to attention pairs, which essentially means that when you consume a newsfeed, some money will accrue to you because you have looked at certain pieces of content. And finally, the 5th case is some combination that is a sum of cases 2, 3 and 4. Exhaustively, you can have only these 5 cases for the routing of money flow in blockchain based media. Now let us walk through all of these cases one by one. So the first case, advertising won't exist at all. Think for a moment whether this is a plausible scenario. I personally think this is not a plausible scenario because when I look at advertising, I see essentially the trade of money for influence. Advertising is essentially agent X has money but wants to influence other agents, and he is willing to give up money for influence, for the power to influence other agents. And this kind of trade has survived multiple technology shifts. Advertising existed in the 1850s when Arthur Conan Doyle used to write in the Strand magazine, through to radios, to televisions, and the current web. In some sense, advertising represents a fundamental human need of business owners, politicians, and other people to be able to influence crowds on a mass scale. And this fundamental human need is not going to go away because blockchain technology exists. Therefore, I think advertising will continue to exist in blockchain social media. Whoever is going to be the ultimate delivery mechanism to deliver content to the attention payers is strongly incentivized to incorporate advertising. The second scenario is that advertising revenues might be routed to content creators. This kind of idea is being pioneered by projects such as Steam. Now this in itself is a very useful idea because many content creators have challenges in monetizing their work. When I personally scan across the web, I see that content of many kinds is ceasing to be scarce. For most of humanity, we were living in an era of information scarcity. There was much less information than people were wanting to consume. But with the rise of cheap content creation and the web, what has happened is the total amount of information has grown much faster than the free time that humans as a whole have to consume that information. What this has resulted in is the problem of information overload, or the subjective experience of just not having enough time to see and read all of the content that one would want to. So in many areas such as fashion, sports, or technology discussions, content is ceasing to be scarce. When content itself is ceasing to be scarce, I personally think that there could be many blockchain media networks that can be built out of the back of free web content. And that these media networks will not need to pay for what is essentially not a scarce resource, content. A third kind of routing of money in blockchain social media could be that advertising revenues are routed to attention payers. This is probably what Scenario is trying to do today. In this case, one would look at a particular news feed for a certain time and then get paid some money because they've looked at particular items that advertisers want us to look at. I personally think this is not that plausible a scenario because of essentially two reasons. The first is the challenge of scale. So if I look at Facebook with its market cap of $150 billion and I divide that market cap by the total number of users, which is well over 1 billion, then I get something like $150 per user. What that means is that if all of the advertising revenue of Facebook from today until the far infinite future were routed only to users and not to the shareholders of Facebook, then each of the users would end up receiving around $150 over the next, say, 10 or 15 years. So annually, all of these users might just end up receiving $10. My question here is, would you personally change your information consumption and look at advertising you don't want to see in order to make $10 per year? I personally think this activity does not scale very well for the user or attention payer. Ideally, like when you want to earn money, you want to do some activity which makes you a lot more money for your time. The second item is the challenge of microtransactions. Each person might be consuming 10,000 items of content in a year. When they make only $10 a year out of consuming various pieces of information, each piece of information might give them only something on the order of a tenth of a cent. And this makes it very tedious for them to keep track of all of these small attention micropayments. Trying to route money from advertisers to the attention payers or the users is going to make for very clunky user interfaces. So what remains? We have eliminated the non-existence of advertising in blockchain social media. We have eliminated the routing of advertising money to attention payers. And we have chosen not to focus on routing advertising money to content creators because there's an excess of content in many areas of the web. What remains, I think, is the beautiful idea of routing advertising revenues to signal generators. And this is the idea that we are going to go down in the rest of the presentation. Now this actually might seem like a crazy idea, because what in essence it would mean is that in the future people would earn money because of their likes, their favorites and their retweets. Routing advertising revenues to signal generators is a very powerful idea due to some intrinsic reasons. Reason number one is signals determine newsfeed quality. I personally have the experience that there are many people on Facebook I would like to add as friends, but I can see that they are bad signal generators. They end up liking stuff that I really don't want to see on my own newsfeed. And therefore I stop following these people. And it might make sense to incentivize signal generators to do a really good job at it. The second interesting thing is signals on the internet are unlike probably any other economic good I can think of. So normally if you look at economic goods like apples or oranges or shirts, they lose value when you replicate them. So imagine the Star Trek universe is here and we have machines in which we can put anything we want, and that machine will create copies of that anything. You put in an apple and there'll be 5 apples out of the machine. The price of normal economic goods like apples or bananas would fall as more copies are created. If I put in 1,000 apples there and out come 5,000 apples, the value of each apple would be lower than what it was before. But signals on the internet are not like that. Here I have the example of Fred Wilson. So Fred Wilson is a famous venture capitalist who has around 600,000 followers. So whenever Fred Wilson quotes somebody or writes something about somebody, he's generating a signal telling his followers to pay attention to a particular thing. Many of these followers are going to look at Fred Wilson's signal, look at that particular thing, and copy Fred Wilson's signal by retweeting. Now, but what does that do to Fred Wilson's signal? Doesn't it make Fred Wilson's signal even more powerful? Think about it for a moment. The more the signal of a particular person is copied, the more powerful the signaling capability of that person becomes. Normally, when you think of the internet, you see a system in which it is very easy to create copies. And because it is very easy to create copies, it generally reduces the value of whatever comes on the internet. Put a new genre of music on the internet, there's going to be lots of copies of it, and the value of each individual piece of music is going to be reduced. But signals are these special exceptions on the internet that gain value as they are imitated. The third thing is that signals scale gracefully. For instance, we have the example here of Benedict Evans, who is a venture capitalist with Andreessen Horowitz. Benedict circulates a newsletter every week where he just puts all the important piece of news that he read in the previous week. And today he has around 63,000 subscribers. Now let's assume that Benedict requires effort X to do this particular work. Even if his number of subscribers were to grow from 600,000 to 6 million, 100-fold, his effort would still be X. So no matter how many people consume his signals, his effort does not change. This is what I mean when I say signaling scales gracefully on the internet. Because of these three factors, I think advertising revenues being routed to signal generators is fundamentally a very powerful idea. And let us see how we can achieve this. On the implementation side, there are ways by which we can route revenues to signal generators. How? We have the content web, which is basically a data structure in which content links to each other. And let us imagine that a group of signal generators come together and form a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization. I call it here a signal generator DAO for lack of a better term. Now each of these signal generators owns a token, share or asset in the DAO. Just like cryptocurrency networks or other DAO networks, there is this native asset that somehow represents ownership of that network, and all of these signal generators own different amounts of this token. This token can be traded on exchanges. What these signal generators end up doing is they signal the importance or non-importance of particular pieces of content on the web. That is their only role. And finally, we have the attention payers who follow the signals in order to decide where to pay attention to. So whichever piece of content has been signaled as important by people whose collective holdings of a particular asset are larger will get more attention. So to make it concrete, perhaps we could take this example of American football. So every day, lots of content is being created around American football. So what if you generated like a signal generator network or a signal generator DAO around American football with a native token, which we might call, say, footsies. There might be, say, 1 million units of these footsies distributed across various different holders. Now each of these holders during the day read different pieces of content generated around American football and signal which one is important in their opinion. And then you have applications that read these signals from the blockchain, and then they compose news feeds centered around American football that are consumed by the attention payers. So this is an example of a signal generator network related to American football. So as you can see, the idea itself of having signal generator networks is very broad. You can have like sports-based networks, American football and soccer. You can have political networks such as communist or libertarian networks. You can have lifestyle networks, or you could have profession-based networks as well, such as those around cardiology or real estate. So I believe the future is thousands of networks performing the role of doing good signaling for all of the topics that people create content for on the web. Now this idea itself has certain deeper features which make it a very potent idea. First of all, the usage of this token allows us to make signal generation expensive. All of these people that hold tokens and perform the task of signaling bear some expenses or risks in order to become a signal generator. A, they must invest capital to buy tokens. B, they must lock up tokens into unsellable bonds for a few months. C, they assume the risk of price fall and pay the cost of capital in order to become a signal generator. And D, they assume risk of app makers ultimately disregarding their signals even if they have borne all of these expenses. So making signal generation expensive is a key cornerstone of this design idea. I believe that signal generation should be made expensive, and the people doing signal generation should be exposed both to the downsides and upsides of doing a good job at signal generation. Making signal generation expensive is a way for us to bring skin in the game for people who are generating signals around the web. Now on the other side, once signal generation is made expensive, we have a natural monetization model for each of these signal generators. The advertisers generally want to make their content prominent on the web. In the future, they will be willing to trade capital in order to get powerful signals on their content. The way signal generators can monetize their work is by charging advertisers for signals. Now, this kind of market can be implemented in various ways, such as an off-chain OTC trade using privacy-preserving smart contracts, or trade using prediction markets. So this trade of signals for money effectively creates a revenue model for the signal generators. If they do a good job at it, their signals will be very highly valued and they will make more money from doing the activity of signal generation. If they don't do a good job and very few people pay attention to their signals, their upvotes will trade for very low amounts in the market. So what these two things, making signal generation expensive and creating a revenue model for signal generators, end up doing is create an incentive structure or hamster wheel. Let us look at it. So let us assume there's a network around content related to communism. Let's say the signal generators in that network are doing a good job. So we start with good signaling. Once there is good signaling emitted from such a network, more people will follow their signals on what content to look at. But when more people follow the signals of a particular network, what happens? The value of achieving that signal becomes higher to advertisers. They would want to shell out more money in order to have that particular network signal their own content very strongly. What this leads to is larger revenues to signal generators because they can effectively sell their upvotes for higher prices. But when each individual signal generator starts to make more revenue, the market cap of the token rises. You can think of the token as like being a machine that you need to purchase in order to enter the business of signal generation. And the more the number of tokens you purchase, the stronger your signal is going to become. So if there's a lot of revenue to be made using this activity, you would be willing to pay high amounts for these tokens, and therefore this would result in a greater token market cap. But what a greater token market cap does is it puts more value at risk for all of the signal generators, and it creates a greater potential of reward for them. And this improves back the quality of their signaling. So if you look at this, this is like a hamster wheel or a positive feedback effect that has the potential to become bigger and better with time. And while we are not going into the details of the token in this presentation, we can actually reason about and write an equation for the intrinsic value of the token. I call these tokens attention-backed assets. The reason is that the value of this token is tied very deeply to the total amount of attention that is following the signals of such a network. So the greater the attention directed at the signals of such a network, the greater is the intrinsic value of the token. So we can write a mathematical equation on the intrinsic value of such network tokens. Just as a share is a claim on the future cash flows generated by the business, and you can write an equation capturing the intrinsic value of a share, we can write an equation capturing the intrinsic value of an attention-backed asset. Now, the other powerful property of this design is that just as in Bitcoin, there is this notion of equilibrium with different agents such as miners, full node owners, and users cooperating together in equilibrium. We also have the same notion for the signaling game or attention-backed assets. In this equilibrium, the incentives and actions of the signal generators, advertisers, and attention payers balances itself out in order to create a system that creates utility for all of these constituent agencies in such a way that none of these agents have an incentive to deviate from the system. And I shall be talking more about this notion of equilibrium in this system in later videos. So this was a sort of a teaser into the concept. I'm working on a paper that will describe the concept in detail, the financial valuation model in detail, and enumerate the equilibrium concept that I mentioned in the previous slide. This particular work stands on the shoulders of three giants. The first is Maciej Olszewski, who had the idea of building Google for an economic web and is pursuing this idea through user feeds. Many of the concepts used in this presentation were borrowed from Maciej Olszewski, especially the notion of attention being the fundamental scarcity of the information age. Second, Michael H. Goldhaber is a journalist who wrote on attention scarcity and how the flood of content on the internet would end up cheapening the value of content and raising the value of attention in the future. He was right, and his works continue to influence Maciej and me today. Finally, Dr. Michael Spence, who is the 2001 Nobel laureate in economics for developing signaling theory in the 1970s. I'm using signaling theory that was developed by him for the equilibrium concept of the signaling game proposed here. Some of the related projects that are pursuing very allied objectives are Steam, which wants to create a system to reward content creators, Cinereo, which wants to create a system to reward attention payers, and Meme Markets, which wants to create assets around memes. So do check out these projects if you found this presentation interesting. This was Meher Roy talking about an architecture for blockchain media networks. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I am available on Twitter with the handle @MeherRoy. Do contact me if you would like to discuss this idea further.